great. Somebody from Lincoln Center. Okay. Can we get a volunteer to do the minutes for tonight's meeting? Don't all respond at once either. Who hasn't done it in a long time? Let's see. Doug, Christian, or Jay would be the ones who haven't done it, in my memory anyway.
I'm not in your committee.
You know,
What's
remember
that?
that I just did it. You forgot that I just did them?
No, I didn't. That's why your name was not called.
Oh, I
Right.
thought you said these people just did it.
No, those are the
No,
people who
they're the
are.
ones that haven't done it lately.
Well, I don't think it should be Doug.
Andrew, I just said
Really
that I'm
Yeah.
not a member of the committee.
Yeah, I don't think it should be Doug either.
I'm happy. I mean, I'll do it next month.
No problem, Doug. Sarah did it recently. Ken did it recently. Barbara did it recently.
I did it recently, but I'm happy to do it again.
That's true. You did do it recently. You shouldn't have to do it again.
I'll do it next time.
Okay, I'm writing that down.
On our
Okay.
committee,
I
on parks.
I
the
just did a
two
very
co-chairs
lengthy one
also take- We
for
take minutes.
preservation. I need a break.
Well, that can't happen tonight. This is quite an agenda. Let's see.
Draw
We
straws.
really. Sorry?
Draw straws.
Yeah, so I don't want you to, I mean, people that have done it recently, you've done it fairly recently, Elizabeth.
I don't care. I just want to get the meeting started. So if you want
Yeah.
somebody to take some minutes, we're recording the meeting. I'm happy to just,
If
we're
you
recording
can,
the
that would be
meeting. I can go
most
back.
appreciated.
Okay,
Let's-
this time it's
let's get
Elizabeth,
started.
next time it's Jay, and we're set for the next 2 months. First agenda item. By the way, for those who are not on the committee, this is the Transportation Committee of Manhattan Community Board 7. Our agenda is on the web, and we're going to go through it as expeditiously as possible. So,
And item number 1 is 70 Lincoln Center Plaza, an application for a revocable consent to the Department of Transportation to continue to maintain and use 4 levels of an underground parking garage, I believe. Sean Watts is online with us. Can you unmute yourself, Sean?
I'm not Sean
Oh, you're
Watt.
gonna
I'm
do it?
Adam Dunn. I'm doing it
Okay.
for Sean Watt, but this is not my item. Our item is the second item, revocable consent for
Oh, for
a
84th
stu-
Street.
Yeah,
is
84th.
anyone here for item 1?
Do you mean from Lincoln Center? That would be me.
Yes.
Okay.
Sarah, yes, great. Can you give us just an explanation of what you're asking for? It's pretty obvious, but
Sure. Yeah. So we've had this revocable consent for couple of years. The building, the Rose Building that it is under, is a Lincoln Center owned building. It's been around since I believe the 80s, and below it is a garage where we have a garage that we use for Lincoln Center patrons. And part of the garage is should be under a revocable consent with the city, and so that's what we're requesting.
yes, and for those that don't really know it as 70 Lincoln Center Plaza, it's also known as 165 West 65th Street. Is there anybody who needs to comment or would like to comment on this item?
Call the question.
Okay, so committee members, if you're in favor of granting the revocable consent, please raise your electronic hand at this time, and we'll see what we have. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Yes. And I think that is everybody actually on the committee. So non-committee board members in favor, may we see your electronic hands? So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm getting 5 and I don't, and so that would be 5, 0, 0, 0. Anybody need to abstain on this matter? Okay, so let's lower all the hands if we can. And thank you, Sarah, for that. This will go to the full board, which will be the first Tuesday in February.
Great, thank you very much.
Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much. Now, I guess, Sean, would you like to speak to item number 2, which is a revocable consent for a proposed stoop and fenced-in areaway for 319 West 84th Street?
Right. 319 West 84th Street is one of the 7 houses, row houses that in the block that's built following AB pattern back in 1893 when it was built. And at some point the stoop was removed. Our client would like to place the stoop back and then have the areaway that's matching the rest of the row houses.
Okay, I don't have, do you have, or Jerry, do you have the representation of it? I believe it was sent, but I don't have it in front of me. Well, let me just ask you, is this going to narrow the sidewalk, or is this in line now with other houses that have the stoops restored or didn't lose the stoops?
It is in line with other houses where they have the stoops at the location they have.
Great.
Has
All
this
right.
been signed off by Landmarks?
Yes, it has been
Right.
signed off by Landmark.
Okay, Mark?
You want me to share my screen? I can
And
show
it also has been, this resolution on the Landmark side was approved by this board in October of 2019.
Okay.
Wow.
Any other questions, comments,
Great.
criticisms?
What are we looking at?
We're looking at the row house that is going to get the stoop added back on.
And that's the brown one there.
Yes.
Okay. I just wanted to mention that when I looked on Google Street View, the street is identified as Edgar Allan Poe Street. And it's
Well, that's the
319.
secondary name, yeah.
Right, but I mean, that's kind of a hazard of secondary street names is there's nothing identifying this as West 84th, just Edgar Allan Poe Street. So,
That's bizarre.
yes.
Sorry, I joined late. Why is this before transportation?
Because
Because
the
it affects the
sidewalk,
sidewalk. It's a stoop restoration and it will impact the sidewalk, so it comes to transportation.
Thank you.
Sure.
well,
All
given that
right,
Landmarks has signed off on it, I'm ready to vote. Any other
I
comments?
am too.
It
So,
looks
okay.
like construction has started already.
It's a recent picture.
Yeah, I had put an older picture just because this garbage skip is in the way, but the new picture shows
yeah, it looks like
construction having started.
it looks like it's partially there, if not fully there, just not colored yet. All right, so I guess it's an academic vote, but all those committee members in favor, would you please raise your hands and let's see what we got. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 9 committee members, great. Okay, can we see non-committee board members in favor of the resolution? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Looks like 6. Anybody choose to abstain on this vote? All right, that's 6, 0, 0, 0. Thank you all. Howard, you want to take 3 or
Sure. Well, I think
we'll both
most of
take
the
it, I guess.
Well,
Yeah.
we'll both take it. It's a big one. Most of the people on this call are very much aware that there was a text amendment which put the DOT in charge of something new in our city, outdoor restaurant seating. We have yet, I saw a presentation from them, a slide deck, which said we should be getting plans from them in 2 months. At this point, the board, our community board, and most community boards have said that community boards want to be part of the process by which the DOT comes up with the standards for outdoor seating. So this item is on the agenda simply for informational purposes. No one is expecting us to have a resolution, even though the agenda said something about a resolution. It's just supposed to be an update, namely that the DOT is in fact in charge. And I think it's about 2 months, Andrew, correct me if I'm wrong, when they're expected to come out with their guidelines. And two,
Yeah, I think you're right.
To confirm that we have enthusiastically and assertively said community boards should be as much of a part of that process as possible. So
Exactly.
It's open for discussion. But that's
We
the
were
status.
concerned when we heard the initial text change and the response from DOT that they are now going to take DCA's place in terms of sidewalk cafes as well as in-street seating. And
Yep.
they sort of said, we're not going to come to you on that issue. But of course, we want to be consulted. I think we need to be consulted on sidewalk seating and in-street seating, on its appropriateness, on its size, on its design, all of that.
Yeah,
and I
and
know
just
that
let me-
land use and BCI are going to look at this as well. And we're supposed to develop a joint resolution, which will, and then have a public hearing, maybe in February.
And just let me add something very important. This is not the meeting at which we should discuss what we would like to see. We have to, we've requested to be part of the process. We will be part of the process in some level, but the details of that, we just don't know anything at this point. So
Right.
that's where we are. So comments, questions, criticisms. I see Rich, then Christian, and then Jay, and then Arena.
Can we
I
recognize
said Rich was first. Rich,
committee, can we recognize committee members and then non-committee members?
okay, sure. Jay is the first of the committee members, and go ahead, Jay, and then
I
Arena.
just have a couple of comments, one of which I made at a full board meeting recently was, and in light of what Andrew just said about all the various standards that are being developed, we still, as a board, have not taken a vote on whether or not we support the continuation of this Restaurants in the Roadway program at all, no matter what the standards are with safety, traffic, design, size, all of those things. So we should just bear that in mind, and I hope that everybody keeps an open mind, because there are a lot of issues involved with a program of restaurants being permanently in the streets. The second is just a reminder that this board, for as long as I can remember, has actually had a stated policy of not approving enclosed sidewalk cafes. The only thing we've done over the years is reapproved, grandfathered, and many of the issues are the same. And I would just ask everybody to keep two questions in mind. I won't take time to go into all the issues with enclosed sidewalk cafes, but keep in the back of your minds the question, why are these structures different? And the second question, in many instances, is why are they not worse?
Thank you, Jay. And I think there'll be an opportunity when we see what the DOT has in mind to go to the extreme and say, we don't want any of this. So I think,
Okay.
that's the time, that's definitely an option on the table. All options presumably will be on the table once they go back to us. It's just we have nothing at this point.
Agreed.
Thank you. Irena.
Thank you. Jay addressed part of one of my questions. The next one really has to do with process. Should we proceed to take a position as a committee and as a board, whether we can take that position in consultation or joint meetings with BCI, and when those restaurants border historic districts, that we take them in consultation with preservation, and not as a singular committee, would be just a request.
I think that's certainly a legitimate request. I think that would be something to consider when we have specific ideas from the DOT, and we could decide how best to implement them. But that's something we could definitely put on the table at the time. But I'm just hypothetically, they could say community boards have no input, period. So that would sort of be a moot issue. Obviously, there would be an objection to that. But I think that's something to consider when we talk about what's going to happen on the street with regard to restaurant seating. But that's a good point. We could bring
Thank you, Irena, because we've already decided that BCI land use and transportation are going to be discussing the issue. But as you point out, if it's in or adjacent to a historic district, then preservation should also be involved.
And I happened to be at a meeting, I guess just Jessica Mates was chairing. So it was before the election. I think it was before January. So it may have been a borough president's meeting, and there were representatives there from DOT, and it was a borough-wide meeting. And I was listening in, and to Howard's point, I believe the community boards, based on that conversation, will be involved.
Hope you're right.
Yeah, that'll make a lot of people happy.
Yeah.
Okay, anyone else from the committee who wants to say anything? If not, we'll go to Rich.
Christian's hand is up. Is that?
Rich and Christian.
Yeah. Oh,
Rich.
okay.
Rich and then Christian.
Yep.
All right, thank you. Real quickly, I think the last vote was kind of informative, where we just voted on whether or not to approve a stoop that's already being constructed. And I think when we think about how we should approach the open restaurants, I agree we should, as a board, should have are we in favor of this or not? And then we should come up with general guidelines. But I think if we're going to go out and try to approve each and every restaurant, it would slow things down and we'd end up voting on things after they happen, or we'd slow restaurants down so that the restaurants go out of business before we vote on them. So I think we need to figure out the process, but that process needs to be really streamlined. So we're giving general guidelines, but not voting on every single restaurant. Once we,
as I said before, the guidance from the DOT may say we do not have the ability or the right to weigh in on every structure.
All the better, yeah.
But we don't know.
Well, Colleen, are you on the call? Somebody said DOT was on. I believe Doug told me.
She's on, but not as a panelist.
Oh, let me make her a panelist because she answers questions. So let's see. Colleen. Okay. Now, Colleen, if you can answer the question that Rich just raised, how far in advance do restaurants request either in-street or sidewalk cafes?
Hi, Andrew. It's Colleen
Hi,
from DOT.
Colleen.
So the CB the CB will be involved in the process, just so you know.
Great. And just to answer Rich's question, how far in advance do restaurants apply for in-street seating or sidewalk cafes? How early does DOT
I wouldn't have any general or specific. I wouldn't have any specific information at the moment to share with you until we come to the community board.
Okay. Thank you.
Who else do we have? We have, oh, Barbara, you didn't speak.
Was Jerry Christian's hand was up? No?
While
But, okay.
Colleen is on, I wanted to ask, so from now until you start to make some guidelines that are actually made into law, how much time will that take?
It would probably be maybe, I want to say, another few more weeks, because I think we were planning to have a workshop in January, but it got postponed to February.
I know.
So I'll keep, yeah.
So right now, we have a lot of structures. Many of them have enclosed themselves 100%. They have no ventilation coming into them at all. It's like a plastic bubble, and people are eating in them, and they somehow feel that it's safer than being inside an actual restaurant. I didn't think that the whole point of this was just to expand the size of restaurants that we had here, and many of them are shabby shacks, decrepit, rats living underneath them. There's a space underneath all of them, and we all know that that has contributed dramatically to the rat population here. So how are we going to end this? And I don't think it's going to be a few weeks before you actually have everything set in stone.
So
Folks,
we
can
haven't.
whoever's got the noise in the background mute themselves? Thank you.
Now it's too
Colleen?
quiet.
Well,
Yeah.
I'd love to get an answer if possible. I mean, are we just going to live with these hideous structures until DOT?
No, I mean, if you have some locations where you find that the structures are dilapidated or abandoned, just please let us know. We'll go out there and we'll inspect them. We already have inspectors that are going around doing inspections and issuing notice of violations.
Great. Thank you, Colleen.
Finally, Christian.
Okay, so let me give you my take on this whole process. So to aid the viability of the restaurants and ergo to aid on the recovery and the economic recovery of the city, they came up with this open restaurant program as we have it right now. In the midst of all of this, they decided and went ahead to make it permanent, which is what the guidelines that we're waiting for are about. The part of this permanent arrangement means that every restaurant can have a street seating and sidewalk seating, provided that it doesn't go against the guidelines that are forthcoming. The era of the community board being able to disapprove a sidewalk cafe is over. Completely over. We can no longer disapprove. Now, our main input is going to be now in the decision process as to what the new guidelines will be. But we no longer are going to be, because otherwise it goes against the idea of the economic program for the city. You know, the idea is to allow the restaurants to be viable, so they are allowing them to have a street seating and sidewalk seating, provided that they follow the guidelines. We are no longer going to be able to say you cannot have that one because we don't believe that it's good for you to have it there.
Is that true?
Well, thank you, Irina. I was just about to say, we don't know that, Christian. That's an expectation. Let me just be clear. We know nothing. That's what we know. We know nothing. We're all speculating, and I don't know if it's the best use of time. We may have input and we may not have input. I just don't know. No one knows.
That's the key. That's the key question.
Yes, we just don't know. So the point is that we could spend the rest of the night talking about what we'd like to see in the street. We don't know anything. We have to see what they're thinking, and then we will comment on it. The one thing we can all agree on is that we should have input into that process. But it hasn't begun yet, or at least we're not privy to what has been happening, unless Colleen wants to give us a preview.
I don't even have a preview to give you, to be honest.
Okay. So we're really speculating about something that just hasn't been decided yet.
That's
or
correct.
if it's been decided, we're just not privy to it. Ken.
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up with Colleen about Barbara's observation about outdoor restaurants being completely enclosed and effectively being indoors, outdoors. Is that a violation? And would a summons be issued?
So Ken, there are some that are enclosed and it's not a violation because they do have to have proper ventilation. And again, if you see that there is a location that you feel that is not in compliance, do let us know.
We will. Jay, your hand is up?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a little confused. As you know, Andrew, before this meeting, I sent a note to you and Howard and the chairs of the other involved committees, and I was concerned that 3 different committees over the next 10 days or so were holding meetings where this was a subject of discussion. But as Howard said, I was assured that none of the committees was in a position where they were going to issue a resolution, but that this was an opportunity to discuss issues surrounding these restaurants in the roadway from their distinct perspective. And I was under the impression that we were going to kind of discuss the safety, traffic safety and roadway related issues for the purpose of simply enumerating those issues to be injected, as it were, into the discussion at a later date when the full board would be called upon to formulate and vote on a resolution. In the interim, we received from our district manager a list of all the guidelines that are currently in effect under the temporary or emergency program, several of which relate to pedestrian and traffic safety, things like reflective material on the restaurants, barricades, and so forth. And while this is purely anecdotal, we all walk around this area within our community district on a constant basis. And based on my reading of these standards, I think you'd be hard pressed to find a single temporary restaurant in the roadway that complies with these requirements. I had sent a note to Colleen a while ago about whether or not any summonses have been issued, et cetera. And I haven't gotten a detailed response. But the truth of the matter is, as Barbara has pointed out, most of these places have become a second restaurant in the roadway. They're fully enclosed and et cetera. And I haven't seen one yet that has the compliant barricades or reflective tape, and they're not supposed to block fire hydrants, and they're not supposed to block street signs. I mean, it's the Wild West out there as far as these structures are concerned. And my point is that at some point, and I think the Transportation Committee is the appropriate committee, we need to look into the specifically, not the design issues and not the business issues and
the safety
for it, but the safety traffic issues, because there are a lot of them. And I again would remind everybody that our captain from the 20th precinct, who was at our full board meeting and discussing the number of deaths that have occurred on Amsterdam Avenue this year, were largely or exclusively the result of what he called sideswiping because of the narrowing of that thoroughfare. So there are some very serious safety issues for vehicles, for pedestrians, et cetera, that need to be discussed, and I think our committee is the appropriate vehicle from the board point of view to
Yes.
visit those issues.
Jay, I
and-
see the safety issues as the key issue for our committee. And
Exactly.
we'll bring them up when we have something.
I
to
guess
do.
my question, Howard, is again a matter of process. So we've talked about it here, and we're contemplating that at some point the board is going to take action. And there are serious issues there, as Christian has raised, what the role of the boards is going to be, et cetera. So I don't know if you've had further discussion. What exactly is the process? Because we haven't discussed any.
Jay, as Colleen
specific.
said, the process has not begun yet. We have nothing. We know nothing at this point.
Well, are we going to wait to discuss the safety issues until we get a set of guidelines from?
That's there. Presumably, we're going to get a proposal and we will comment on it.
Okay.
That's what we're going to do.
I just want to understand the process.
That's the process as I understand it.
Okay.
And
Yeah, I
Colleen,
think so. I think so.
correct me if I'm wrong.
That's correct, Howard.
Yeah, so we
Okay.
will get a proposal and then we could say, they may say there are no restaurants, there's no restaurant seating in the roadway, or they may say restaurant seating as of right, you could put anything anywhere.
Okay.
I have no idea what they're going to say. So to start debating how to do it with absolutely no information.
Howard, as of right, has some real problems. What if the restaurant has a fire hydrant in front and you're blocking it?
The
What
point
if
I'm
it's-
making is
what
that
if
we
it's got
don't
a
know
bus stop?
anything. So this conversation is not going to go anywhere because we know nothing. We have nothing to discuss.
Are restaurants that are in front of hydrants and bus stops going to get a lower rating because they can't put in the street seating? I mean, all of these issues.
You're right, Howard. We don't have a specific proposal for the permanent program, but we have a very detailed set of guidelines for the emergency programs. And I would make a non-educated guess that what we're going to see is going to be pretty damn close to what they issued on a temporary basis, certainly as far as where they can be located and the safety issues and the barriers and all that kind of stuff. So I'll stop with that.
I don't know. And I think if I had to put money down, you might very well be right. There's the issue of what the guidelines will be. And then of course, there's the issue of enforcement. But again, I've said it already. We have nothing at this point. We have a few more people who would like to speak. Doug, then Josh, and then Rich.
So I just wanted to, obviously as a member of BCI and also in the work that I do representing restaurants, there respectfully to Jay, there are many restaurants, I can't say all of them, that have painstakingly followed the program, that have the proper ventilation. In fact, some of them are so good that on a cold day, because they're so well ventilated, you can't even sit there. But and some are not compliant. I've seen a whole mixture, but there are plenty that are compliant. The thing that I for the overview is that I think most of us know, but just for the sake of, just for those of you who might not know. So obviously DCA was the governing authority, which is no longer called DCA, that would issue the enclosed and unenclosed sidewalk cafe permits. So that's one program. Obviously DCA is no longer, they're the Department of Consumer Workplace Protection. We all know DOT is now taking it over on the emergency program. So the existing cafe permits that BCI committee would approve or disapprove, and the renewals thereof were all through DCA. During the emergency program, they all were permitted essentially as of right, for lack of a better term. And those are existing cafes. Some of them are new, some of them were already permitted. Then there is the issue of so there's enclosed and unenclosed, right? And I know that we've typically not approved new enclosed. What I've heard, this is just my ear to the ground, that the new program at DOT will not allow any more enclosed cafes, but they will grandfather the existing ones. But at least that's what I heard the intention of. We'll see what the final plans are. Then you have the roadway seating, which is obviously what everybody I think is talking about the most, which are the seats that are in the roadway, not on the sidewalk. Right. And that's obviously in conjunction with the emergency program. Then you have adjacent seating, which is sort of another gray area, seating next to a building that didn't object or another tenant next to existing permitted. Then you also have another category of outdoor seating that's on private property. not on New York City property. So it did not ever require permitting from DCA or approval of the community board, other than licensing for the state liquor authority to serve alcohol on that property, but it's on private property, so that is not part of this program. So, obviously, I guess all this is going to go under the umbrella of DOT. I hope that safety is first and should always be first. And I know that we have multiple committees that are going to weigh in on this. I agree safety is first, but I also think business should be considered, our neighborhood, land use. Preservation, and Irena brought that up. It's interesting. Preservation to me is a gray area. In a historic district, you want to consider the context of the neighborhood. So yes, but then at the same time, as we know, historic districts really pertain mostly to the buildings themselves, and cafes are not permanent structures, nor are they attached to the property. So they were usually immune, if that's a word, from preservation or any approvals because they were never considered a permanent change. So I don't know if preservation is apropos or not.
Again, we don't know anything at this point. I would try to wrap this conversation up because we there's still Josh and Rich, and I think we'll wrap it up then. But let me just say, from the Transportation Committee's perspective, I think that would be our number one concern, appropriately so.
Safety.
Safety, yes.
Yeah.
Safety. Josh and then Rich, and then hopefully we can move on to Bridges.
I just wanted to say, Doug stole my thunder a little bit. While there are a ton of cafes that are not compliant with what the guidelines are, there are many that are compliant, that do have the proper barriers, that do have the proper, reflective tape, that are well ventilated. So I don't think it's fair to use all-inclusive words like none or all, because it's just not accurate. And there are some of us as a business owner who are trying to be compliant and following the rules that have been set forth. And there are some that aren't. And, DOT, I can tell you from experience, has been out there. I've spoken to them. I've seen them on Amsterdam almost every day at different locations talking to people, whether it's someone walking the street or in the car. And, some people will respond to DOT and some people won't. It's a matter of what DOT is enforcing. But there is definitely a presence out there. And I do think that it's just not fair to say all and that there are none in compliance. That's all I want to say.
Thanks, Josh. And Rich?
Yeah, I just want to correct the record. Jay had said that the executive officer of the 20th precinct had blamed side swipes for the fatalities. And I just copied the transcript of our December meeting into the chat and reviewed it. It was two separate things he talked about. He said that the majority of crashes were due to side swipes, but he did not connect the crashes with the fatalities. And if you look at the 5 fatalities that happened in Amsterdam, based on the information we have, none of them was caused by a side swipe. So I think it's not fair to blame the outdoor dining for these fatalities because of side swipes. I'm pretty sure that's not what he said, and it also does not match the data that we have on those crashes.
Okay. Jay, did you want to respond to that quickly?
Recollection is that he said that the crux of the problem was the narrowing of the roadway, and obviously Amsterdam, between the bike lane, the restaurant lane, a parking lane,
double parked delivery vehicles.
You got a 6-lane roadway that for all practical purposes has cars squeezing in and out of one traveling lane. That's my point.
So the transcript of what he said is in the chat, and the video, I linked to the video, and I'll also link to my slides showing all the fatalities from the district from last year that show the data that we have on each of the fatalities.
Thank you. And let me just assure everyone, we will have plenty of opportunity to discuss every detail of this when the DOT comes back to us with a plan. I'm sure we'll spend a lot of time doing that at that point. And again, it'll be a much more constructive conversation at that point because we'll at least have something to react to. And I'm sure there'll be plenty of reactions. Anything else? Okay. What's next? Next is, hang on here, the bicycle and pedestrian access to all bridges. There are a bunch of bridges in New York City that have inadequate or actually no access for pedestrians or cyclists. I remember growing up in the shadow of the Verrazano Bridge, and my parents always remarking that you couldn't walk across it. It was something that, they grew up in the shadow of the Brooklyn and Manhattan bridges, which they walked across all the time. There are a whole host of bridges that lack access, and Ken had raised this issue. I had been reading about it. And Ken, do you want to add something to what I just said?
Well, I'd just say we're talking about MTA bridges, such as the Triborough, the Henry Hudson, the Marine Park Bridge. Those are the three that come to mind.
Marine Parkway.
Oh, sorry. Okay, Gil Hodges.
Exactly.
I'm sure I'm forgetting a bunch of others, but the issue for cyclists is that cyclists are required to walk their bikes, even when it's really not necessary. They're legally required to, and people have been given tickets, especially on the Triborough when they do. So this is especially, and if we're serious about climate change and addressing it, and we just found out the other day that transportation is the major contributor to our 6% rise in climate change last year or this year in carbon emissions. That we're going to have to get serious about treating cyclists and pedestrians as equal partners on our bridges.
So let me, as an interested party, and if there's a vote on this, of course I will abstain because I am involved in this. Bill 6235 was recently signed by Governor Hochul, and it states it will amend the Public Authorities Law in relation to requiring the Metropolitan Transportation Authority to develop a strategic action plan to improve bicycle and pedestrian access at its bridges and passenger stations. This was signed. It also puts an extra person on the New York City Transit Riders Council, of which I'm chair, the Long Island Railroad Commuter Council, and the Metro North Commuter Council. And these are people who are deemed to have bicycle expertise, who will guide our councils in advising the MTA on how to accommodate bicycles at stations. Commuter stations, of course, have tons of automobile parking, but not all. In fact, few have bicycle parking. And of course, there are some bridges. I have been told that the Triborough and the Henry Hudson are going to have bicycles available on them. In fact, Henry Hudson Bridge is going to have a wonderful thing so that people along the West Shore and who are biking will be able to go into the Bronx in a wonderful way. I know that they're working on the Triborough Bridge walkway right now to accommodate bikes. I was told there is something on the Marine Park, Gil Hodges Marine Parkway Bridge that prevents it at this point, but the Cross Bay Bridge is open to bicycles as of this moment.
So Andrew, this is a point of information. This is the law now?
This is law now.
So what is the, Ken is shaking his head. What is the issue, Ken?
Well, I thought the law was that they have to study it and come up with ways to accommodate.
Yes, they do. That's the law, but the law also puts an additional person on each of the three commuter councils at the PCAC. Yes.
Yeah. The law isn't that they have to immediately accommodate bikes and pedestrians.
Yes. And just in case you're not aware of this, I believe it's the S79, but there is a bridge that does, there is a bus line across the Verrazano that does take bikes on the front of the bus. I think that may be one of the only ones in the city of New York. So they're aware that this is an important need between boroughs. And they're also talking about developing a ferry now between Staten Island and Brooklyn. So that would be another avenue to get between boroughs. But Andrew, yes, this is law now.
Andrew, just cycling on the Cross Bay is now legal?
Yes.
Okay.
I was told yes. I will double check that, but that was one of the crossings that I was told it's okay.
So it's just a matter of changing the signs, not the regular.
Yes, but I will double check on that, Ken.
Okay.
Okay, Irena has her hand up.
Thank you. I think this is marvelous. the one caveat is if at all possible, and maybe Andrew, you can speak to this, that there's a different approach for pedestrians and bicycles so that we're not both approaching the same access, to get in and get off. That would be my only concern, that bicycles and pedestrians are not trying to access enter the walkway at the same point.
Place. Yes, that's a very good concern. I know the 59th Street, the Queensboro Bridge has allowed for that, and pedestrian crossings are separate from bicycle crossings. So it's on everybody's mind.
The Brooklyn Bridge famously did that.
Yes. So it's obviously the way to go from now on.
Any other questions, comments, criticisms?
We will be, if you know of places either in suburban Long Island Railroad or Metro North stations or at subway stations that you think have available places where bike locks or bike lockers, like there's one opened in Grand Central Terminal, which you can lock your bike and take the train. So we would like to see more of that as well.
Anything else? Okay, well, at the risk of ruining our record for the speediest meeting, I'm going to raise the last issue on our agenda, and that is the New York Manhattan District Attorney's decision not to charge fare beating. I will put my cards on the table. I was the one who put this on the agenda. I read his memo, Bragg's memo, and I'm a lawyer, and I was somewhat offended in that I think it's the legislature's job to come up with the law and the district attorney's job to enforce the law. The district attorney gets to pick and choose which cases he or she decides to prosecute. But in my opinion as a lawyer, they don't get to pick and choose which laws they get to enforce. So I was somewhat offended by that. So I've raised this issue, and there is a lot of strong opinion on both sides. People who think this is a minor problem that we should just not focus too much on it, to other people who think this is just like the broken windows kind of thing, which opens the door to much more serious crime. I just, again, raised it because I thought this was not the DA's purview. I thought this was the legislature's purview, and then there's also a fair consequence to the MTA, which I thought Andrew could address. So that's basically why I raised it, and maybe Andrew can address the economic consequences of it.
Sure, I absolutely will. Let me just do what Mark Diller is asking, to promote Courtney to a panelist. Let's see.
By the way, there was one other person Nicole Jelinas, is she on the line? Okay, go ahead, Andrew.
Let me just.
She's in the.
Yeah, Nicole actually wrote a couple of articles, and I think also has something to say tonight.
Yeah, Nicole is an expert on this issue, so I'd like to give her a chance.
I'm promoting Nicole to panelist as well.
Right,
I have some strong opinions about this topic, needless to say.
Everyone has strong opinions.
I checked with the acting MTA chief financial officer before this meeting, and the approximate fare loss due to fare evasion system-wide is $300 million a year. I have a feeling that's low. The IG once came out with a higher figure. That means more frequent and higher fare hikes to those that can least afford it, which is the poor of our city who rely on our mass transit system. In addition, the people who are committing crimes in the system, 99.9999% of them did not pay their fare. If we can stop that at the turnstiles, we've not only helped the MTA's bottom line, we've helped the crime issue. So I feel that I do know that even though I was told that former DA Vance in 2017 actually stopped prosecuting fare evasion. So this is not something new. That doesn't mean that you don't have a penalty if you're caught. If the MTA police or the NYPD catch you, you are subject to a $100 fine, which goes through the TAB, the Transit Adjudication Bureau. If you don't have the money to pay the fine, if you get federal funding of any sort, the money is taken out of that, I was told. But we do have cameras now in every station. And now under the new police commissioner, Keeshant Sewell, police officers are now going to consider subway stations in their area of patrol as part of their beat. So we should see more cops in the subways as well. And we obviously have the homeless issue, which these poor folks really need a lot of help. And it sounds like the new administration may try to help them get the services that they need, because living in the subways is not good. Inhaling rail dust 24/7 is not good. But to Howard's point, this has implications. If somebody knows that there's no penalty, why not do it? And is this all walks of life are beating the fare now. I've seen people wait for 2 and 3 trains for someone to exit through the slam gate, and then they rush in. So everybody is doing it, and it is costing the system money. And, that has implications to the MTA's finance. The out years don't look great for financing for the MTA. Congestion pricing, when we get that, will help the capital program, but it won't help the operating program, which is where the fares and services come out of. So it's a concern, and I share your concern, Howard.
Okay, why don't we have Rich? I'm sorry. Well, we don't have anyone from the committee. Maybe we could have the Nicole, and is there someone else who else, Elizabeth, is here to address this issue?
I think it'd be great to hear from members from the community before the board on this one.
Okay, but first we'll hear from Nicole and any other people who are, okay.
I consider Nicole part of the community. So.
Oh, Nicole's wonderful.
I'm just south. I'm in over here on the bridge between CB4 and CB5. But hello everyone. It's nice to see some people I know and hopefully meet some people I don't know. Can I share my screen? I just have a couple things, numbers that may be easier to visualize if you can look at it, if that's okay.
Sure.
Let's see if this works.
Oh my God, it worked.
Okay, so let's see. Yeah, so the story of crime on the subway was successful until 2019. If you think back to the 1970s, 1980s, and early 1990s, the per person risk of being a victim of a violent felony or even a non-violent felony was much, much higher. In 1981, we had 13 murders on the subway. That was normal pretty much consistently from the mid 70s through 1990. We had double-digit murders on the subway, at least 10 people and often 20 people killed on the subway every year. And people sort of, not everyone, but people sort of accepted this as normal, that we would never be able to cut crime on the subway. The New York Times ran an article that said, you're basically pretty safe as long as you don't take the subway at night or walk through dark passageways. People said, okay, that's it. That's the best we can do. But in 1990, there was kind of a tipping point where A, we had 26 murders, and B, one of those murders was a very high profile murder. That year at Labor Day weekend, young man named Brian Watkins in town from Utah with his family, a tourist, was coming in to see the US Open, went down to a Midtown Manhattan subway station and was victims of robbery, and Brian Watkins was stabbed to death in trying to defend his parents from the robbers. And so this gained, for whatever reason, and there are many reasons, but we don't want to get too far off track, it gained quite a amount of attention. The mayor, David Dinkins, was a huge tennis fan. He wanted to showcase the US Open as a global event about how he was turning around New York. Instead, a tennis fan like himself was brutally slain in the subway. And so we started to see the turnaround of the crime situation in the subway, to the extent that that by the late 1990s and well through 2019, we had an average of either 1 or 2 murders on the subway every year. 2019, we had 3, which was an aberration. Usually there was 1 or 2. And in that, by the time we got down to 1 or 2 murders on the subway, you could genuinely say there was almost no conceivable way to get crime any lower than that. Having close to 2 billion people in contact with each other, having 1 or 2 murders a year probably is good as we were going to get. And you can see this, back in 1990, 19 felonies per million subway rides. By 2019, closer to 1 than obviously 19. So what happened during the pandemic? Subway felonies per million subway rides just exploded. We went from 1.5 in 2019 to closer to 3. If you were one of the much fewer people taking the subway last year, you were at far greater risk of being a victim of violent crime. And it is a violent crime. We saw the nature of crime change on the subway last year, where in 2019, the most common crime on the subway was the non-violent felony, larceny. And that is a function of a lot of people taking the subway and feeling so safe that they were actually careless. They would put their phone down on the seat next to them. They would leave their property unattended. So, you don't want to be a victim of a larceny, but this is a non-violent crime. If you're going to pick a felony, this is the one that you would choose to be a victim of. In 2020, crime got much more violent. A much greater share of felonies last year were violent robberies, violent assaults, and murders. We had 7 murders last year. If you look at the official police statistics, they'll say we had 6. That's because they're misclassifying one. They classified it in 2021. It belongs in 2020. So you can see the news stories add up 7 murders during 2020. And we saw that in the very first weeks of the pandemic, where we had 3 people murdered in the subway just in March of 2020. The subway conductor, Garrett Goebel, died in an arson fire that was set by a person on the subway. We had a person who was killed by a fare beater that March. Fare beater attacked him and stabbed him once the person trying to be a good Samaritan let him in through the exit door. And then we had another random stabbing. So 3 murders in March of 2020 was not a good sign portending the rest of the year, and now also portending 2021. So going from 1 to 2 murders a year on the subway to 7 a year, not a terrific thing and something that we should pay attention to. And again, this is just to reiterate, as subway ridership disappeared last year, violent felonies per rider went to a level that we had not seen almost ever. It has gone down since more people have come back, but it has not gone down to anything close to what it was from 2012 to early 2020 and even before that. So if you are taking the subway today, you are at greater risk at violent crime. And now people say, well, that's because no one's riding the subway. Well, that is certainly a part of it, but that does not mean that it is not a problem. It is a serious problem that has to be addressed. So the ratio of subway arrests and summonses, which are different from arrests, was falling before the pandemic and continues to fall. Before the pandemic, you could argue that this was a good thing, that there was a virtuous circle in the subway. There were so many people riding the trains. People had gotten so used to riding the train at 1 a.m., 2 a.m. You could get on a crowded train and feel pretty safe. So the police could pull back. And of course, there was a political desire for the police to pull back on arrests and summons. Until 2019, early 2020, the police were successfully pulling back on arrests and summons, and crime was continuing to fall. Part of this was because even as they pulled back on arrests, they were issuing more civil summonses. So the police were still interacting with people who were entering the system, as Andrew described, without paying their fare and deterring them from committing greater crimes within the subway system. But after the spring of 2020, the decline decline in subway arrests and summons it was not a good thing, because it was no longer concurrent with falling crime. Instead, crime was rising, and there was no virtuous circle to try to be a circuit breaker. There was no crowd on the subway to try to deter any of this violent crime. So where are we now? We have numbers that go through November of 2021. So we are slightly better off than we were in 2020, but we are nowhere close to normal. And that is also not a good sign, because ridership has really plateaued. You know, people who were saying back in early 2020, yeah, you know, we have more crime on the subway, but it's because we don't have enough riders, so we'll just wait for the riders to come back. Well, they're not really coming back. I mean, I'll get to that slide in a minute, but we're still less than half of the pre-COVID riders. So 2021, once again, we had 7 murders, matching the 2020 level. And actually, we may have had 8. There was a final killing in December that's not classified. One of those murder victims was a homeless man, a young soccer player, Akeem Lowy. Akeem Loney, rather, stabbed to death on a train near Penn Station right after Thanksgiving, down on his luck, riding the trains because he had nowhere to go, and was stabbed by a random stranger. And the assault numbers also are actually higher than they were before the pandemic, even in raw numbers, even leaving aside that the fact that ridership is down. We had 421 assaults in 2021, 326 in 2019. So 30% rise in assaults, even with subway ridership being down. Obviously, some of those assaults are becoming murders. You see some of that show up in the enormous spike in the murder rate that did not abate in 2021. And unfortunately, we started off 2022 pretty badly with a murder New Year's Day at the Fordham Road subway station in the Bronx. The only crime that has gone down is the non-violent larcenies, when you put a phone next to you and someone takes it. That has gone down because people are not being careless on the subway, and there are fewer people to be careless. So when you read that subway crime is down, it is only the non-violent larcenies that are down. I guess that's some good news, but the overall picture is not good news. Again, ridership, we're at a little bit less than half. That has been consistently true throughout this whole thing. Before Omicron came along around Thanksgiving, we were closer to 60%, but we have never gotten anything close to pre-COVID ridership. It doesn't look like we're going to anytime soon. So where does this leave us with fare beating? As Andrew said, we know that, well, most fare beaters probably will not go on to commit a violent felony in the transit system. Everyone who commits a violent felony in the transit system did not pay their fare upon entering the system. And again, just to take the latest, although I can give you an entire list of these things if people don't believe me, the suspects in the New Year's Day murder on Fordham Road, there are clear videos of the suspects entering the transit system without paying the fare, walking through the exit door. If a police officer had intercepted them at the fare gate, they would not be facing very serious prison time right now. All they would be facing would be a fare beating summons, and most likely a weapons possession arrest for carrying the knife with them. But if the enforcement of fare beating, both civil and criminal, is down consistently throughout the pandemic. Fare beating arrests were less than 1,000 last year. We had closer to 3,000 in 2019. And civil summons, which is the most common punishments for fare beating, is you're not going to be arrested. You pay the $100 fine, as Andrew said, also down 16%. So as we are intercepting fewer people who are going through the exit gate, we are seeing a rise in crime. This has been consistently true in enforcing subway the laws when crime was very high in the early 1990s. This was how Commissioner Bratton initially attacked the situation. It was not for years that we got into the virtuous cycle that we could sort of pull back on some of this. Now, is enforcement of fare beating down because fare beating is down? I'll just leave you with one final slide. Fare beating is up. Before the pandemic, about 4% or so people evading the subway fare, closer to 14% last spring and closer to 10% now. So the people who are entering the subway system without the purpose of paying to ride the train from one place to another, a small percentage, but a significant percentage of them going on to commit other violent felonies, those people have not left the subway system. The people who have left the system are the people who are trying to get from point A to point B. This means that everyone who is still taking the subway is subject to a much higher risk of violent crime. And before I end, and happy to see what everyone else has to say, I will just note that of the 14 and possibly 15 murder victims that we've seen over the past 2 years during the pandemic, every single one of them has been a minority, most of them minority men, as well as at least 2 minority women, one of whom was likely the victim of a hate crime down in lower Manhattan over the summer. But these are crimes that disproportionately and almost entirely affect minorities, partly, of course, because people who cannot work at home and have to be on the subways, even if they don't want to be, disproportionately, of course, lower wage workers who have no choice but to take the subway. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicole. This was quite amazing because Nicole was asked to do this less than 24 hours ago. So she really lived up to the term I called her an expert. So thank you, Nicole.
Thank you, Howard.
Nicole, do you have any sort of hope hearing our new mayor and the new police commissioner that there will be more police and more strategically placed police?
I have hope because it seems like Commissioner Sewell, she started off very well. As you mentioned, she has said that, and the mayor himself said last week when he went down to the Fulton Street subway station, that securing the subway system will be one of his topmost goals. And so one would hope that he would not say something, that he's going to do something and then not do it. But yes, he is working in a difficult environment when it comes to the new district attorney, Alvin Bragg, going out of his way to say specifically that he will not prosecute these crimes. Now, I know, and as you said, this is just a continuation of the Cy Vance policy. And indeed, even before that, no one is going to prison because they don't have 275 and they're jumping over the turnstile one time, even multiple times. This is almost never a top charge. It would be at most a third or fourth charge tacked on to much more serious felonies. But yes, hopefully we will see better deployed police in the subway system to intercept people beating the fare, and also, riding on the train. I mean, in the Mayor Wagner
the return to offices will help, obviously.
From Mayor Wagner until early in the Koch years, when budget cuts stopped it, there was a police officer on every single subway train. And in the early years, from the 60s through the 1970s, that strategy actually worked. It was on nighttime trains. The problem was a lot of the crime gravitated to the daytime.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Nicole. Other comments? Let's see. Doug, and then Irena, and then Jay.
Thank you. First of all, Nicole, thank you. That was just chock full of such information, that so much of that I have been so curious about. One very quick question is, does your data, or the data that you showed tonight, include surface buses as well, or is it all underground subway?
No, it's really all underground. It would be actually nice to see the MTA break out bus data as well, but for whatever reason, they are mostly just interested in reporting the subway data.
Thank you. So I just wanted to say that I share a lot of sentiment, and we may have differences of opinion, but I was horrified to hear that that the DA Alvin is not going to prosecute. I understand, perhaps very well intended. We'll wait and see, but I think it's too scary to sit back. And I'm very grateful that our co-chairs brought this up as an agenda item. I've been speaking for now 2 or 3 years on this committee about how horrified I am seeing non-compliance, fare beating, non-mask wearing, and just doing it in such a brazen way, worse and worse. And it's demoralizing. It's demoralizing for the MTA employees. It's demoralizing for those of us who pay our fares. And, it just, and that's the least of the problem, to know that, how much money we're paying out of our hardworking, income to just see someone walk in front of us. But I think the danger and the safety is much more important than even the money, which is apparently 300 million plus. So I'm very grateful that this is being discussed. I see it with my eyes every day. I've spoken to MTA employees and they're kind of horrified by it. They certainly don't want to be put themselves in danger, and we understand that. So I'm just glad this is being discussed tonight, and I'll shut up now. Thank you.
And Doug, let me just add, how much service could be provided with that $300 million? Okay. Thank you, Doug. Irena and then Jay.
Thank you. Nicole, that was awesome. I mean, just so insightful and so informative. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Irena.
I learned so much this evening. And also, Andrew, just the dollar amount of loss, revenue to the system because of it. And I know that there's been a lot of conversations around penalizing and criminalizing poverty. But I think we know that many people who engage in this practice, not all, but many of them, many low income and poor people are paying in the system. And the fare jumpers are people who are just in many cases, not in all cases, or just don't want to pay. And some of them, to Nicole's point, maybe engaging in criminal activity in some cases. I heard DA, Manhattan District Attorney brag on Brian Lehrer this week. And I don't know if he's walking it back, but he seemed to indicate that the internal memo to his team, people who understand the penal law, might have been mischaracterized when it went public. And that he is now in conversations with the police commissioner on this and other issues. So I'm just wondering whether, I know in the past we've had a representative from the DA's office attend board meetings, or at least, and maybe it might be worthwhile at some point to invite a representative to come and to clarify exactly what his intentions are as it relates to fare beating. And if someone is caught fare beating but is found not to have a criminal record, let me just rephrase that, whether his intention is that if someone is caught fare beating and they don't have a criminal record, that they won't be penalized, as opposed to someone who is caught with a criminal record, and that the penalty might be more severe. I don't know. He seemed to equivocate on Brian Lehrer on WNYC this week. So I just think it would be helpful to get some clarity around what his intentions are, so that whatever resolution comes out of this committee or the board, that it's based on informed information.
Yes, and we invited somebody from the DA's office to come tonight. They could not come, but said they could likely come to full board.
That'll be very helpful to explain the policy. Jay, and then Ken, and then Rich.
And then we have some public members as well.
Great.
Yeah. Nicole, I may have missed it, but what's your affiliation?
I work for the Manhattan Institute for Policy Research, and I write generally about infrastructure issues, urban economics issues, and anything to do with mass transportation. And I also write once a week for the New York Post.
She also has a book coming out on transportation.
Yes, I
I-
have a
By Forum
whole
University
chapter.
Press.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
have a whole
I add
chapter on
my
the
thanks
success
to the-
story of cutting crime, but unfortunately, it's not quite the clear-cut success story that it was 2 years.
Well, anyway, I add my thanks for the great information. And my last question is, I forget what the number is of people that are intercepted by police for fare beating, and obviously a very, very small percentage are actually arrested. And I was just, I'd like to know generally what factors enter into the difference between giving somebody a summons and arresting them.
What factors are usually if you are stopped for fare beating, if you were caught with a knife or a gun, then you would be arrested, and fare beating would be one of the charges that you face, or not, but it would not be the top charge that you face. The other factors are you a recidivist fare beater? That is, have you been caught multiple times doing this, and you have outstanding fines? You get those $100 summons and you just entirely ignore them. Then at some point it used to escalate to an arrest, although they haven't done that in several years. And the other thing was, if you didn't have any identification with you, or although Bratton changed that early in the de Blasio term, so if you didn't have identification, the police would just take you to the station and you could call someone to show up with your identification. And you may say, like, well, who cares, just let them go. But I mean, we have caught people who are wanted for murder in other states, beating the fare. We have caught people who were we caught a serial killer back in the 1980s. We have caught major drug kingpins and leading back to heroin mills, which kill many people through overdoses. So to say, okay, this person just beat the fare, who cares? We'll just let them go. I mean, this is an integral part of doing something that is already difficult, which is preventing more violent crime.
Some people have been caught. Jay, some people have been caught with hundreds of dollars in their pockets beating the fare.
Yeah, in a way, those are the easy ones if they're caught with a knife or a gun or so forth. My last question is, when a police officer stops someone for fare beating, do they have immediate access to information that determines whether somebody has a criminal record or is a recidivist?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. I mean, that's why, sometimes you see someone and they have someone stopped for 20 minutes, half an hour. And that is basically what they're doing, is seeing, does the person have outstanding warrants? And, just to reiterate, in the vast majority of cases, if the person is just beating the fare, they either go with a warning or they get a civil summons. If you are in the 99.999.9% of chances that you are not a wanted serial killer or you're not carrying a gun, you just only face the deterrent so that you don't beat the fare the next time.
Thank you. And thanks again for the information.
Great. Okay, I think it's Ken and then Rich.
Yeah, Nicole, thanks for coming to our meeting. I just have one question and then a comment. If somebody, we're talking about if we did decriminalize fare beating, the way DA Bragg is talking about, they would still run people's records, right? And be able to identify that serial killer or something, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's absolutely true. I don't think that in some ways what Bragg said, legally speaking, it changes nothing. Vance did this years ago. Even before Vance, Rikers Island was never filled with people in there on a fare beating charge. The vast majority of these summonses have always been the $100 fine, where if you want to contest the fine, you go down to the MTA in Brooklyn and say you want to contest the fine. I think it is more the signal that Bragg is sending that this is not an offense that we should be worried about, and how does the police department act on that signal? And I think that's the good news, that the Commissioner Sewell seems to be pushing back on that. But certainly, police can still respectfully interact with people and hopefully deter some of this escalated activity.
Well, I'm actually very happy to see this development, and I support the DA on this. I think all we're talking about is making this violation, which is essentially a crime of poverty, proportionate to the crime. I mean, making the penalty proportionate to the crime. Maybe most people didn't go to Rikers, but some people did go to Rikers. And maybe nobody went to prison, but when you go to Rikers, that's probably worse than prison. And we're not, nobody's saying there aren't going to be consequences for fair beating. There still will be, and there still will be the civil summons. But for instance, Washington, D.C. Has done the same thing in decriminalizing fair beating. I think it's very easy for us progressives on the Upper West Side who are comfortable to say, oh, you know, everybody should pay their fare. But Cy Vance was going in this direction. This is also, we should remember, this is a leading cause of the deportation of immigrants and of mass incarceration. In many cases, most cases, we're talking about desperate people. So I completely support it, and I'm kind of surprised that more members of the committee don't. And I hope we could get, if we're going to continue this discussion, I hope we get more voices to represent the other side.
Rich, were you next?
I think I was next. I was waiting for it to be called, but thank you so much. And I'm really honored that Nicole's here. I have so much respect for her, and everything she writes is incredibly valuable, including today's piece in the Post about armed robbery. But what we've got here ain't armed robbery. And we all know how critical the MTA is in the economy and the budget concerns with the MTA. A number of us, especially Howard, would love for the MTA to be free, but that's not the current reality. Subway, as we all know, depends on passengers paying the fare. And it's easy to say that everyone needs to pay the fare and that those who don't need to be punished. There's a lot more to the picture. I think we need to tread really carefully here before we weigh in, before we pass a resolution, especially as we haven't heard from people who work in the community and work with the people impacted by the prosecution. As Nicole said, you know, there's nothing new here. The decision not to prosecute those not paying the fare is not new. Cy Vance announced in 2017 that his office, quote, would no longer prosecute the overwhelming majority of individuals charged with theft of services for subway-related offenses unless there's a demonstrated public safety reason to do so. He also said the criminal justice system should not be perceived as a collection agency for the MTA or other government entities. I want to specifically address the crime statistics that Nicole gave. And since she had slides, I'm going to use some slides. Here's Nicole's slide showing violent felonies per million subway rides. And I had a Twitter debate with her in July when she first put this out. I think this is extraordinarily misleading because we know that subway ridership nosedived during the pandemic and is still low for a big reason that a lot of people aren't going to work right now. So where my wife and I would be taking the subway twice a day, we're not taking the subway just because our offices are closed. So you've got ridership a lot lower, and there's studies showing that when ridership is lower, crime actually either stays the same or increases just because there aren't that many people around to witness the crime and report on it. So, and it makes the criminals bolder. So I think this is misleading, and this really concerns me because I worry that when people hear, oh, look how high violent crime is on the subway, it keeps depressing riderships. You have a depressed denominator, it still looks like violent crime is high because there are fewer people riding, and it self-perpetuates. So Nicole also put out the pie chart showing the comparison of subway felonies by category between 2019 and 2020. Pie charts are hard to look at. If you look at this by the same numbers with a bar chart or a column chart, you can see actual crime went down between 2019 and 2020. Now, granted, subway ridership went down dramatically, but if you're looking at these categories, yeah, the murders went from 3 to 7, which is horrendous, and any murder is horrible. Same with rape. Really happy to see Nicole's new numbers that it went back down in 2021, but overall crime was down. If you look, I don't have all the numbers, but if you're looking just at rape, murder, burglary, assault, and robbery, relatively consistent over the 3 years. So, if you're looking at this, it looks really scary. If you're looking at actual numbers, the main driver again is ridership is way down. So then I think a concern here is conflating enforcement with prosecution. And as I said, prosecution sounds tempting. And we know that enforcement can be effective, and it's tempting to punish people for breaking the law. However, we're talking about giving people, almost exclusively young men of color, criminal records for not paying a $2.75 fare. We need some sense of proportionality here. Prosecution can make it harder for them to be employed and even increase incarceration, all for a $2.75 fare. And Nicole says it's usually not a top charge. If it's not, there's nothing stopping the police from stopping people who don't pay the fare, running them and arresting them for other charges. If they're wanted for murder, if they're wanted, they can still be stopped. There's nothing stopping the police from stopping people fare evading. The issue is just whether the DA is going to prosecute it. They can also issue a summons. It's just that the DA said that he's not going to prosecute. And Nicole said that 99.999% of the people stopped are only stopped for fare evasion. We need to get those numbers, but we need to hear from the DA's office how many people had been prosecuted solely for fare evasion. Also, Cy Vance wasn't saying, and Alvin Bragg isn't saying, that fare evasion shouldn't be enforced. They're saying that it's not worth all the collateral consequences of criminal prosecution. Criminal records, backlogs of cases in the Manhattan Criminal Court, increased incarceration rates at Rikers Island. According to the NYPD's most recent report from Q3 2021, the vast majority of those arrested and summons for fare evasion are either Black, which is 30%, Hispanic, 40%, and male, 75%. Only 17% of those summons were white. And that's something that we've seen. Enforcement of fare evasion is very heavily biased towards communities of color. During the campaign, Alvin Bragg was very clear about his views about mass incarceration and declining to prosecute low-level crimes for which there's little or no public safety benefit. Nonetheless, he won with 83% of the vote. The MTA has its own Transit Education Bureau, the TAB system for summonses, but only 38% of summonses are paid. If we're going to weigh in on this issue, I think we should have a better sense of why the TAB summonses aren't working before we recommend criminal prosecution. Of course, the subway is expensive. I have a family of 4, my wife and 2 kids. If we take a round trip somewhere, it costs us $22. Fortunately, we can afford it. The MTA does have a program, which I would imagine very few people on this call know about, called Fair Fares, which offers 50% off for people at or below the poverty line.
Of course, we know about that, Rich.
Of course, you know about it, Andrew. I don't know that many others do, though. As of September, 240,000 people had enrolled, which is only about a third of the eligible people, of the estimated 700,000 people who are eligible for the program. Also, the cutoff for this program is the poverty line, which is extremely low. It would be great for this to be higher so that more people would be able to afford the subway. It also needs to be better communicated, and applications need to be easier and more available.
Rich, you need to wrap up. If I hope you're close to wrapping up.
I've got a few more things. I've done a lot of research in this issue. And I want to talk about options. I think we need to make the subway more affordable, especially for people who aren't able to pay, and we need it to make it easier to pay, especially for the unbanked. I agree with Lorena, people don't want to pay. If your budget is stretched and you need food, rent, cell phone, and other things, you know, the subway is the easier one to get out of. And I agree, we need to make it so that they feel the need to pay. There are a number of enforcements that are alternatives to criminal prosecution that have worked in other cities that need to be considered. One is messaging campaigns that have proved to be very effective in other cities to change perspectives of fare evasion and instill a sense of shared responsibility. Enforcement also can be effective. Studies in a lot of other cities are hard to compare because a lot of other cities use what's called proof of payment, which is like what the SBS buses have, which is at any point while you're in the system, you might have to show a ticket to show that you've paid.
And which we will have when Omni is in full throttle.
Yeah, and that also gets into questions of whether the police want to be stopping people mid-ride to make sure they paid. That gets into real confrontation issues with the police, which is not something we want to discuss in this meeting.
I got to ask you to wrap up if you can.
In a study, uninformed officers within the view of turnstiles who were just observing, not issuing summonses, decreased observed evasions to near zero in 13 observations at 3 stations over the course of a 5-day period in October of 2019 in the city. Also, anecdotally, the reduction of clerks in the token booths way back when was correlated with an increase in fare evasion. There are other restorative justice approaches.
Rich, I gotta ask you to wrap up.
Yeah, and Rich, I just want to add, these are issues really for the legislature and for the MTA. We were talking solely about Bragg's unilateral decision to basically ignore one of his duties. That's what this.
Yeah, and what I'm saying here, though,
about.
I'd be very concerned about putting out a resolution calling.
There's no resolution on the table. There is no
resolution on the table.
There was in the agenda. It said potential resolution.
It also said that for the last agenda item, which we didn't.
That's boilerplate. Okay, community. Anyone from the community who wants to?
Yes, Erica Gerson and Maria Danzillo. Erica first.
You have to unmute. Either you're speaking very low or you didn't unmute.
Yeah, I think you have to promote them in order to let them unmute.
Oh.
Okay, let's do that.
Oh, I see how to do this.
Okay, you should both be promoted now. Maria, Erica, can you hear?
Okay, yeah, thanks guys. Sorry. Yeah, there was no button before.
Something is
Erica,
wrong.
can you turn off your camera because your audio might work better?
Can you
Okay,
hear
try
me
it
now?
again. Yes, thank you.
Better.
Okay.
Yes.
Great. Thank you, Nicole, for that valuable information. But to Rich, I wanted to let you know that we do know how to read charts. So you might want to reconsider representing all the information the next time. And I think you made a really strong claim without any data that things are biased. The fact that any crime may have different numbers based on how you want to categorize racially does not necessarily prove a bias. So I think you need to be really careful about throwing that around. It's a strong accusation to make against anyone, including our police. What I want to say is that I was really heartened by this data-driven conversation and heartened to see how many people share the sense that it's not so simple to say who's being a victim here and who's, when we think about the poor and someone who might not be able to pay the fare. I was aware that we have that program for the poor who are unable to pay. And as Irana pointed out, I think it was Irana, that the vast majority of the poor are paying their fare, and the victims of crimes, as Nicole said, are the poor. So yes, there are people that can work from home right now, but it's a very real statistic to say for those who cannot, their chance of being the victim of the crime went up, which is exactly what her chart proved. Your chance, if you do not have the privilege of staying home, your chance of being the victim of the crime went up substantially. That was a real fact. It was not a manipulation. And it's not our job to do PR and to make people feel some way. It's our job to look at the facts and deal with them. What I would encourage this community board to do is make your voices, and by extension, our voices as a community, heard to our elected officials. We just spent a long period of time with an elected official who did not, I don't think, reflect our community and our sense that safety is a human right, and our sense that the police should be backed up in doing their job, and all the other things that you've been talking about tonight. So I would strongly encourage you to make some of the feelings of this committee known to our city council person, to our state legislatures, and to the people at all levels, so that they can do anything possible to use legislation as a tool against our GA, who has chosen to take the law into his own hands. And I thank you very much for taking up this important issue.
Thank you, Erica. And
Thank
Maria.
you. Thank you.
Yes, hi, thank you, good evening, and thank you, Nicole and Erica, those are great comments. I just wanted to pick up on what Howard said earlier about the fact that what Rich was saying is really a job for the legislature. So just going back to the district attorney election, not all candidates in the Democratic primary had do not prosecute lists. This is a movement of the progressive district attorneys around the country, and we've been doing research on this, and they're far from legal. They're far from tested in the courts. And in fact, these do not prosecute lists are, a lot of theorists and lawyers are taking the position in writings and whatnot that it's really usurping the role of state legislatures. It is violating the separation of powers between the executive branch and the legislative branch, and that these district attorneys are abusing their role by refusing to prosecute broad categories of crime and failing their duty that they took, their oath of office, in upholding the law. Those of us who are lawyers are really deeply offended by this, especially because violent crime is in fact going up and victims' rights are being ignored. So in New York State in particular, there is a specific law, New York County Law 700, which states specifically that it is the duty of every district attorney to conduct all prosecutions for crime and offenses by the courts for the county for which he or she shall have been elected or appointed. So this New York County Law 700 is being violated. It was being violated by the previous district attorney, and District Attorney Bragg is now picking up on that. So the question is, what do we do about it? Litigation is very expensive, but I do believe that there are going to be challenges to these do not prosecute lists. I think there are lawyers around the country that are talking about this. And I think we need to get to a place where the discussion of whether these laws should be disregarded by prosecutors in their sole discretion without any input from the public is something that we really don't want to see as a model, because it could go the other way very easily. These could be far right wingers running district attorneys' offices doing things that we don't like. So we have a rule of law for a reason, and we have a process for a reason. We have separation of powers for a reason. And I think it's up to the community board and community boards everywhere to make their voices heard, that we need to uphold the law and the rule of law. And there can be normal conversations, processes. That's what lobbying is for. That's what's writing letters, speaking to legislators, and voting. So that's my thoughts. And thank you for hearing me out.
Thank you, Maria.
Thank you, Maria.
And Nicole's
has her
hand is up, I believe. Nicole, did you want to wrap up?
Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you to Maria and Erica. And, I don't disagree with a lot of what Rich says, but I do object to characterizing the chart as misleading. I have certainly not made a secret of the fact that subway ridership is down. The chart clearly says violent felonies per million subway rides. And I clearly said multiple times that subway ridership is down. It is common and statistically sound to measure things per capita. There is absolutely no doubt about the fact that everyone riding the subway is now at a greater risk of violent crime, many times greater in some types of crimes, including murder and assault, than they were before 2019. It would be very strange for someone to say, well, crime is down on the subway, and entirely ignore the fact that subway ridership is not even half of what it was. And as to the issue of should we entirely decriminalize fare beating, I am more worried about the fact that civil summonses are down because, again, these civil summonses are important interactions. But I don't know that I would give up the theoretical tool of the misdemeanor arrest when one considers that if there is no tool to use in reserve, then there is nothing stopping someone from piling up dozens or even hundreds of civil summons with the $100 fine. There is absolutely no deterrent beyond that to a recidivist fare beater. And I do kind of object to saying that this is a crime of poverty because poor workers pay the fare. People are they are applying for the Fair Fares program for the half price fare, which I support. But there are no examples of a poor retail worker, restaurant worker, healthcare worker being a recidivist fare beater and being arrested for this. Not one person has brought up an example of someone being caught in this net because they are working at a job and they are just not able to come up with a 275. That's not to say, of course, that someone doesn't forget their money or they don't have money that day and they are in a desperate situation, but that is not the chronic recidivist fare beater and the person who is more likely to go on to commit a crime that we are talking about here. The vast majority of poor people would not even dream of committing even a small criminal infraction.
Yeah,
Nicole,
just
I
before
once-
Mark has raised his hand, I just wanted to pick
sure.
up on something Nicole said that I think it's a little offensive to assume that poor people are more likely to break the law than other people. And I just wanted to say from the perspective of seeing other people not pay the fare, I think it's for them, it may in fact be harder when people who do have limited financial means manage to pay the fare. I think that it may hit them harder to see other people not paying. I think the issue is many people have raised the fact that DA Vance was not prosecuting this crime, and that's a fact. But I think the memo normalized this in some way. They institutionalized this policy of treating this lightly. And I think that's the issue I reacted to. Again, I don't think the DA has discretion to pick and choose which laws they enforce, but to the extent that they make a policy of it, in my opinion, it's rubbing it in our faces. So that's what led me to put this on the agenda.
It's advertised now, whereas with DA Vance, it was not.
And threatens to normalize it as an acceptable behavior. Mark.
Thanks, Howard. And a lot of what I wanted to say before has been said, so I'm going to take that off my list. But I do think there's a couple of things that I can add to this conversation, which I'm very glad that we've had. And I'll sort of group them under the umbrella of this came up on your committee under the with respect to fare evasion or fare beating or fare cheating, as I was taught. But it's a much bigger conversation than just fare evasion. Among the things that jumped out at me on this memo were on the same page that the fare evasion provision is listed. There's also basically a declining to enforce, or I'm sorry, I should really be clear here. It's not enforcement, it's prosecution. So, because the DA doesn't determine whether someone gets arrested, they determine whether or not someone will ever see a process relating to that arrest. So they could still be arresting people and sending them to Rikers, God forbid, not a good place to be. But whether there's consequences after the arrest is what we're really talking about in this memo. But the one that jumps out at me, one of them is resisting arrest, that resisting arrest would not be prosecuted unless it's coupled with something else. And then later on, there's a provision that says that the DA will not prosecute and seek a penalty of life without imprisonment. Now that only, as far as I know, only relates to murder. And as somebody who has personally litigated, defended capital, people accused of capital crimes or people sentenced to death, that's one of the ways in which we avoid the sentence of death. So I'm concerned about that. So the rubric I would suggest is this. This is a much bigger conversation than just fare evasion, although the fare evasion part is very important. I'm glad that you're talking about it. And my personal reaction to it is that I am concerned about it the same way that I'm concerned with the opposite end of the spectrum, which is mandatory minimums. You may remember that, especially under the Rockefeller drug laws, that there were mandatory minimum sentences that after a very short period of time and a very small amount of controlled substances, somebody effectively went away for life. And we know who, we know how that was done as well. So my concern is that in a way, this takes away discretion the same way that mandatory minimums do. And that one of the things that we really need to be careful of. So what's the answer to that? The answer to that is prosecutorial discretion.
Yeah.
And I'm a champion of that because I think that's important. Now, is it the case that prosecutorial discretion needs some oversight? The answer with the evidence of mass incarceration tells us, duh, of course, that it is the case that discretion is being exercised far too often to produce the results that we see that are completely unacceptable in terms of mass incarceration. But I guess the thing that I'm worried about is mass incarceration is caused by mandatory minimums, but it shouldn't also be treated with the same kind of throw the baby out with the bathwater approach the other end. I guess that's where I think that this needs to be I think we need, if we're going to speak as a board about this, I think we need to speak about the whole thing, the whole concept, and not just the limited issue of fare evasion, important though it is. I'll shut up now. Thanks.
Mark, that's very helpful. But obviously, the reason that we are discussing fare evasion is because that's the issue in the memo relating to transportation. We don't have a resolution on the table. I actually don't regret putting this on the agenda, given how interesting the conversation was. So if the committee is okay with it, we would leave it at that.
Absolutely.
Okay. Any new business, old business?
Hi, it's Colleen from DOT. I have to say, this was a really, really good meeting. I've learned so many things that I never thought I would learn. And Nicole, I have to say, I mean, your presentation was really excellent. And your points were they came across really well. Really impressed.
Great. Yes, very impressed.
Thank you so much, Nicole.
That was great.
I just have one update, which is, as many of you know, we've been working on the rotunda, and we do plan to come next month to give a update to both the Transportation and the Parks Committee, and I'll work with Michelle on that. But as many of you have known or know, is that the MTA bus layover on West 79th Street between Riverside Drive and Henry Hudson Parkway will be relocated to the south side of West 79th Street between Riverside Drive and West End Avenue. So about 8 parking spaces will be removed temporarily on the south side of West 79th Street for the duration of the project, because construction activity will restrict bus access west of Riverside Drive. So we're going to be working with MTA on this and the contractor, which is Jerdla, so that they can set up their staging areas. They've already applied for the DOT permits and they've been approved. And my colleague will be out there next week. They're going to be installing the new signage as well as posting no parking regulations in the area and going door to door to give it to the buildings as well.
Great.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
And when will this take effect exactly, Colleen?
It will take effect next week, Monday.
Okay. Are you, or have you asked the MTA or the bus division to give instructions to drivers to not idle if they're in front of people until they're ready to leave or anything of that nature?
We
now
have.
That they're going to be in front of people's windows?
Yeah, we have, and we're going to reiterate that as well. We'll work with MTA on that. That's a good point.
Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
Barbara, do you have your hand up?
Yes, I do. You know, as one of the co-chairs of Parks and Environment, I'm very excited, Colleen, to hear you say that you're ready to present to two committees. Do you think you'll be coming to the January meeting, or will that be in February? Or don't you know?
That'll be in February.
Okay, fantastic. That's fantastic. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Everybody will be very excited to hear that.
Barbara, as this is our January meeting, I don't know how it could be a joint meeting in January, right?
It could be that maybe a different date, that would be a compromise for both committees, so.
Okay.
Irene also has her hand up.
Thank you,
Yes.
Howard. Colleen, thank you for the update. What level of outreach will does DOT plan for the community to notify the community of this change?
Sure. So I've already informed CB7 this morning. I've reached out to all of the electeds in the affected areas, and we are going to be out there posting signs, and we're going to all the buildings in the area. We're going to disseminate the information, give it to, if there's a doorman downstairs, we'll give it to them. We'll put it in the mail room and so forth and so forth.
Thank you, Colleen. Terrific.
Colleen, do you know if buses is going to put notices on the M79s actually in the buses, or is that something you want me to find out?
It would be, well, we're working with MTA, so that's something we can do. We'll
Okay.
coordinate with them.
Great.
Mhm.
Great. This has been a good meeting, a great meeting.
Yes, thank you,
Thank you so
everybody.
much, everyone. Thank you, Nicole, and we'll see you all soon.
And thanks to our chairs, Andrew and Howard,
Oh,
for
thank you.
for a terrific agenda and speakers.
We'll try
Thanks
to
to
repeat it next time.